Are we obligated to do our best, or are we obligated to succeed? That's the question. Well, for many people, and they're not alone, I'm not making fun of this now, because a very great philosopher named Immanuel Kant held this way. For many people, it's obvious that you could only be obligated to do your best. That's the only thing that you could be obligated to do, because that's the only thing that's under your control. Very often, whether you succeed or not depends upon factors that are not within your control. How can you hold somebody responsible for something that's beyond his control? Seems absurd. Kant elevated this into a principle. Ought implies can. To say that someone ought to do something, that implies that he can do it. Only when he can do it is it appropriate to say he ought to. If he can't do it, then saying he ought is either it's just inconsistent or it's just empty. Very often, when you criticize someone for what he did, he says, well, what would you want me to do? What else would you want me to do? Tell me what else alternative I had. And if you can't provide him with an alternative that was within his ability to do, then that seems to eliminate the critique. Say, well, it was beyond my ability, so I had no responsibility to do that. It seems so obvious as to be a no-brainer. But the truth is that there's another position. I think the second position is really the Jewish position. And that is, you are obligated to succeed. Whether or not you can. Even if you can't, you're obligated to succeed. It's only that if you can't succeed, then you get no penalty for failing. You get no penalty. You aren't taxed, you aren't punished, you aren't criticized, you don't lose social status because it was impossible to succeed. And when you hear it that way, it's an alternative position, you begin to realize, well, gee, what really worries me, what really bothers me is, if he couldn't do it and you're going to penalize him for failure, that's grossly unfair. Yeah, we could agree to that. No penalty. But it doesn't follow that he's not responsible. It's just that if he fails, there's no penalty. Now you say, okay, now look, you're telling me that he ought to succeed. And you're telling me that if he fails because it's impossible, there's no penalty. So what do you get out of ought to? What purchase does it have? What implications does it have? What difference does it make in the way you deal with him? So I'll tell you a difference. Let's suppose that A has a responsibility to B, people. And it becomes impossible for A to fulfill that responsibility. A borrowed money from B. And a lot of money, and he had resources and collateral, and he put his property on behind the loan. And in 3 years, he's got to pay up, $250,000. 3 years go by. 3 months before the end of the 3 years, there's a fire that destroys his home in such a way that the insurance won't pay. And he has suddenly health issues, and investments go bad. The end of the 3 years comes, and he can't pay the loan. He can't pay it. So now, according to the two possibilities, there are two ways to do it here. One is to say, well, if he can't, he doesn't really owe the money. He has no obligation to pay it because he can't. The other is to say he is obligated, he should pay it, he ought to pay it, but when he doesn't pay it, he suffers no penalty. Because through no fault of his own, it became impossible for him to pay it. So we're not going to put him in jail, and we're not going to charge him extra taxes and so forth and so on. Just, we're not going to criticize him, shun him, take down his Facebook page. We're not going to do that. But that doesn't mean he wasn't obligated to pay now. He is obligated to pay. It's just that there's no penalty for failure because it's impossible for him to pay. Now, the nafkamina is this. I'm watching this from the outside. And I see that he signed a contract to pay the money at the end of 3 years, and now he's not paying. He's not paying because he hasn't got the money. He can't do it. Should I help him? Should I help him? Should I lend him money now so that he can pay that old debt? If you think you're only obligated to do your best, and here, when he does his best, he can't pay the money. So he's not obligated to really pay the money. He's not obligated to pay the money. He's only obligated to do his best. And in his case, doing his best will not pay the money. Then according to Kant's principle, he's not obligated to pay. At least now. When he can't pay, he's not obligated to pay. Maybe if they find oil on his property, he becomes a millionaire, then he will be obligated to pay. Right now, he's not obligated to pay. If he isn't obligated to pay, why should I help him pay? What am I accomplishing? As far as he's concerned, paying is a non-issue. It has no moral status because since he can't pay, he's not obligated to pay. That seems to me that I don't have any incentive to help him pay. If you take the second position, which I said is a Jewish position, he owes the money, and he ought to pay. It's beyond his ability, he's not going to suffer. He won't be penalized. Not legally and not socially, he won't be penalized. But he ought to pay. So then, if I lend him the money, I'm helping him fulfill a moral responsibility. That makes the world a better place. Instead of his failing to live up to his responsibilities, he's now succeeding in living up to his responsibilities. So whether I'm responsible to help somebody to do something when he's unable to do it on his own might hang in the balance between which way you look at it. If he's obligated to do his best, then I don't have any obligation to help him. And if he's obligated to pay, then I do have an obligation to help him. So this becomes now a question of Jewish law. If there's a mitzvah that applies to someone, but he's in a position where he can't fulfill it, should I give him the means to fulfill it? Should I do that? And here, Jewish law is absolutely unequivocal. It's consistent across the board. Of course I should. He doesn't have a lulav and esrog. It's sukkahs. And I do. Should I lend him my lulav and esrog to fulfill the mitzvah? And then he'll give it back to me? If you take the Kantian position, since he doesn't have one and he can't get one on his own, he has no obligation to do it. He has no obligation to do it. What's his claim on me? If you take the Jewish position, he does have an obligation to do it. He just can't. Then he says to me, listen, I can't fulfill my mitzvah. The mitzvah is binding on me, and I can't do it. Can you please help me? Of course, I have a tremendous interest in helping him. Because God wants the mitzvah to be done. He can't do it on his own, so I'll help him. So this is the difference between the two ways of putting it. And really, we're commanded to succeed. And inability is just an excuse which frees us from penalty for failure. But failure it is. It's failure for which we bear no liability. But it doesn't follow that we aren't responsible to succeed. We are responsible to succeed. Is it clear so far? Okay, now, once you hear that, your whole attitude changes with respect to the mitzvos. The first attitude, the Kantian attitude, is the mitzvos are a kind of obstacle course through which I run, and if I can jump over the hurdles and swim through the ditches and so forth and so on, so then I've proved my ability to go through all the obstacles, and I've therefore done a good job. if I did my best, nothing more could be asked for me than to do my best. If I did my best, I've done everything that I'm able to do, then that's enough. This outcome is brought in Jewish sources. It's just a question of how to interpret the outcome. So, for example, Maimonides says in Hilchos Tshuva that because we have free will, everyone could be as tzaddik as Moses. Tzaddik means roughly righteous. It means doing the right thing. Always doing the right thing. So you say, as Moses? Really? I could be equal to Moses? So Bechon Wasserman has a ma'amar, an essay on this subject, and he says that if I, Bechon Wasserman, would work to serve God with all my strength for 1,000 years, I wouldn't come up to Moses' ankles. But that's because God gave Moses more strength than he gave me. So his performance outstrips mine. But performance isn't under my control. And that being the case, if I use all of my abilities and strength to serve God, just as Moses used all of his strength and abilities to serve God, even though the outcome is very different, then I'll sit next to him in the world to come, because that's what success consists in. Success consists in using all your strength and abilities to serve God. That outcome is correct. But the question is it because that's all you are obligated to do? Or is it because you're obligated to succeed at everything, and the failure in succeeding at everything isn't something you have to pay for? You don't have to pay for it. You're not penalized for it. Therefore, you can sit at Moses' right hand. Otherwise, you'd be penalized. So, the one attitude, the philosophical attitude is, God wants me to show my efforts, wants me to show my goodwill. It's like a personal statement or demonstration of commitment and dedication and duty. It's demonstrating my character, my moral character. That's what the mitzvot do. They give you an opportunity to show your commitment and your dedication and to demonstrate your moral character. That would be the way the Kantian principle would have us look at it. The second way of looking at it is quite different. God gave us a program of action because he wants those actions to be done. That's what he wants. Not a question of showing off my moral character, what they call now virtue signaling. Not a question of showing off my moral character, showing off my good character traits. No, it's getting these things done. These things, when they're done, make a change in the world. The world becomes a different place. Divine energies flow through the world in a different way. Program of mitzvahs is a program of actions to be done. It's just that when I fail to do an action, and I fail because I have no ability to do more than I've done, then I'm not penalized for that failure. But that wasn't the job. The job was to do the action. So my place in the world, my place vis-a-vis God, in the first case, I'm sort of demonstrating my good character to God. The relationship is between me and God, and I'm sort of living up to his expectations or trying to please him. The other picture is, I'm God's representative in the world. He created an imperfect world, a world that needs to be perfected, needs to be changed, needs to be elevated, developed. And my job is to change it, develop it, and to perfect it. That's my job. Not to demonstrate my good character to him, but to do something. Of course, if the job has aspects that are beyond my capabilities, I'm not going to be penalized for that. But that wasn't the job. The job wasn't to show my character. The job was to do the job. The responsibility was to do the job in the world, to make the world a better place. And that is the Jewish view. That the mitzvos are commandments, not to do your best, but the commandments to succeed. And I think that's simplicity. If you're thinking of commandments, when the commanding officer says, "I command you to close the door," He's not saying, please try hard. He's saying, close the door. If your ankles have been tied together, unbeknownst to you, and you get up and you can't move, and you don't close the door, he'll excuse you. But he didn't order you to try. He ordered you to close the door. The attitude, the picture now is that the human being is representing God in the world, and what the human being does is God's activity in the world, and that's where the responsibility lies. Now, I don't think I told this to you. You're fairly new, and I think it's a very good illustration of this idea. We spoke about it in this series maybe 3 weeks ago, but you weren't here 3 weeks ago. There's a Gemara in Ksubas. I'm telling you something that's written in the Pri Tzadik now. There's a Gemara in Ksubas which makes an argument to prove that at least sometimes man's actions are greater than God's actions. Man's actions are greater than God's actions. And here's how the proof goes. Make an assumption, an axiom for the proof, that actions that are performed with 2 hands are superior to actions that are performed with 1 hand. Make that assumption. Now there's a verse that says, Yadi asta oretz, yimini tipcha shamayim, if I'm not misquoting it. My hand made the earth, and my right hand set up the heavens. And the Gemara says, well, when God made the earth, it's hand singular. When God created the heavens, it's hand singular. So you could think of those as level sub 1 of action. But the tabernacle that was made in the wilderness, there it says, Mikdash Hashem konuni yadecha, the holy place of Hashem, have your hands established. Hands plural, 2 hands. And we are the ones who built the tabernacle. So our action in building the tabernacle is called a 2-handed action. So it comes out that at least in this case, when you compare our creating the tabernacle with God's creating the heavens and earth, our action is greater than God's action. That's what it says in the Gemara. Is it clear what I said, or should I say it over again? It is clear. Okay, well, there's a problem with the proof. There's a hole in the proof. It doesn't really work, because when you're describing the tabernacle and you call it a 2-handed action, and you attribute it to us because we built the tabernacle, the verse says, a holy place, O Hashem, have your hands established. Not our hands, his hands. No, it's true we made it. That's true, we did make it. But still, if you're going to try to prove that human actions are greater than God's actions, you need to have human actions being described as 2-handed, I suppose, with 2 human hands. If somehow we made it and you can describe it as God's 2 hands, there's a disconnect. What we wanted to establish is that the human action is greater than God's actions. So if you read the Gemara straightforwardly, there's a problem there. Pri Tzadik says, we're missing the point of the entire exercise. Start at the beginning. The Gemara is comparing 2 types of God's actions. 2 types of divine actions. Some divine actions are done by God, all by himself, so to speak. And some divine actions are done through man. Man becomes the agency whereby a divine action happens. Says the Pri Tzadik, when a Jew does a mitzvah, he's doing it as God's shaliach. Shaliach means not messenger. Shaliach means agent. When a Jew does a mitzvah, it's as if God says, I'm appointing you to do this action for me in the world. Now, when you appoint an agent to act on your behalf, he performs the physical action, but the legal significance goes back to you. If I give a ring to a man and I say to him, go to that woman and tell her that you're giving that ring to her as a way that I should be married to her, when he gives the ring to her, I'm married to her. Not him, not he. Because he's only my shliach. He's only my agent. So he gives her the ring, but the marriage is established between her and me. This is the way in which agency works, and this, says the Pri Tzaddik, is the first step in the argument. The first step in the argument is there are two types of divine actions. Divine actions that God does alone versus divine actions that God does through human agency using a human shliach. Which of those two divine actions is greater? Now the Gemara is gold. The divine actions that God does on his own are called one-handed divine actions. My hand established the earth, my right hand established the heavens. One hand apiece. The divine action of creating a holy place for God's presence to be felt in the world, that divine action, which was accomplished through human shlichus, through human agency, is described as a two-handed divine action. So God's action in creating the tabernacle is greater than God's action in creating heavens and earth. It's called two-handed rather than one-handed. That's stage one in the argument. Now stage two, well, let's see. What is it that made creating the tabernacle a greater divine action than creating heavens and earth? Because it was done through human agency. See how great human action is? Human action confers upon God a level of divine action that he doesn't exercise otherwise. Now don't misunderstand me. And those of you who are listening who don't know me, I work very hard to make my words precise. Notice, I didn't say that man confers upon God a level of action that God can't exercise. I didn't say that. There's almost no condition under which I would say God can't do something. And I did say almost. But he doesn't. He doesn't. He chooses, when he's acting on his own, to exercise second level divine action and leave primary divine action to where he acts through human agency. And that gives you a picture of how great human agency is. Because, as I said, it confers upon God a level of agency which he doesn't execute on his own. So here's the sense in which this connection, where a man acts on behalf of God, that gives his action this gigantic significance. But there, the whole emphasis is not on trying your best and showing off what good moral character you have. The emphasis is on doing the job. The job needs to be done. God gets no benefit out of the shlichus, out of the shliach relationship, if you try very hard and fail. You know, I carried the ring. The woman lives 50 miles from here. I made it to 48 miles, and then I got tired. I didn't, but I really worked hard on the 48 miles. But they're not married. Too bad. She's got to get the ring. She doesn't get the ring. Didn't work. So that picture is a picture of being appointed to do the action, not just to try. It's another feature of Jewish thought and explanation, and that's Gilgul Neshamas, reincarnation. And if you think that that's something, I'm speaking for the recording now, if you think that that's something which we picked up from India or other places, think again. If there's been any contact whatsoever, they got it from us. We're much older than they are. One of the reasons for reincarnation is that people go through life in certain circumstances, especially we who live now, where the temple doesn't exist. And there are many mitzvahs we can't do. We just cannot do them. And in order for the soul to be sustained, the soul and the body, actually, the soul and the body, each of them divides up into 613 elements somehow, and each mitzvah contributes somehow to each of those elements. What about all those mitzvahs that we cannot do? What about all those aspects of the body and the soul which aren't getting their, so to speak, spiritual nourishment? How does that work? And here, doing your best isn't enough. Doing your best isn't enough. To have this effect, the action has to actually be performed. And I'll illustrate this for you with this famous statement in the Talmud, which, when you read the Maharsha, you see that it has to be understood with a certain qualification. The Gemara says like this: Charshav lasos mitzvah, b'nenas v'lo asa'ah, malo v'kosav kilo asa'ah. The person thought to do a mitzvah. Now, thought here doesn't mean playing with the idea or considering my options. It means he decided. He made a mental decision to do it. And then circumstances arose and made it impossible for him to do it. Then it says the Torah attributes it to him as if he did it. So I'll give you an example. I'm standing on one side of a four-lane street, and I see a person asking for charity on the other side. And the light is red against me, and the traffic is going back and forth. And I think, when I get a green, I'm going to go across the street, and I'm going to give him charity. Takes a minute, the light turns green for me, and I walk across the street, and he's gone. He's gone. In that 1 minute, he walked off. And he could have walked off in any direction. I may look for him and I can't find him. So under those conditions, I'm now incapable of performing the mitzvah. I made up my mind to yes, do it, but I can't do it. It says the Torah attributes it to him, accounts it for him as if he did it. Says the Maharsha, not in every respect. Not in every respect. Reward in the world to come, yes. But, for example, we have a principle of mitzvah gereris mitzvah, that when you do a mitzvah, that creates in you a motivation to do another mitzvah. It strengthens your resolve and your inspiration to do more mitzvahs. That you don't get. That you don't get. That only follows when you actually do the action. Not just trying your best. It's not enough. It doesn't help. Or, for example, we are told that a mitzvah, while you're doing the mitzvah, protects you. Whereas Torah protects you even after you're finished learning the Torah. But if you don't actually perform the mitzvah, then you don't get the protection. So here's again a gap where if you do your best, but you don't get all the effects of actually performing the mitzvah. Now, at this point, I think Immanuel Kant could try to make a reappearance. But why? Why not? You told me that if you do your best and you fail to fulfill because it's beyond you, it's impossible for you, there's no penalty. If there's no penalty, then why shouldn't you get the full benefit of doing the mitzvah even when you haven't done it? There are two answers here. The one's on the superficial level, and the other's on a deeper level. On the superficial level, when you do a mitzvah and you get a benefit, particularly you get a reward, it's not like being paid for working. Guy walks on Friday afternoon, gets his paycheck, and he's being paid. When you look at that paycheck, you can't tell whether he's a doctor or a plumber. Well, if it's a big paycheck, he's a plumber. Or he's an accountant, or he runs a restaurant. Money is money. Whatever you do, you get money. You spend it your own way, but the money is all money, the same money. That's not the way reward works. Reward works by the mitzvah changing you, building something in you, creating something in you that makes you able to receive the reward. In a certain sense, God is giving reward all the time. He would blanket the world in reward, but we're not able to receive it. So, what we're doing in mitzvahs is building ourselves into richer and richer recipients of what He wants to give us. So you say, well, if you didn't do it because it was beyond you, you shouldn't lose out. Maybe you shouldn't lose out if you're going to give me a check. But the system is set up so that by doing the actual action, you change yourself into a greater recipient. If you didn't do it, you didn't do it. That's on the surface. But you could ask why it's set up that way. And I think the ultimate answer is that the divine providence has made a decision for other reasons that we're not aware of. That's how the outcome should be. And in order to explain this to you, I want to raise a problem, which is a terrible, terrible, difficult problem in contemporary philosophy. This is a problem that's been thought about for 20 years or more. Some people call it moral luck. And I'll describe it briefly, and I'll show you how it fits in here. This idea of trying versus action has a lot of applications. Two cases. A takes a gun, aims it at B, pulls the trigger, the bullet flies true and kills B. That's case number one. Case number two. A takes the gun, aims the gun, pulls the trigger, and as the bullet is in flight, a gust of wind blows the bullet aside, and the bullet misses B. And B lives. Now, the problem with this case is that when you think about it, we seem to have contradictory intuitions. And it's hard for us to sort ourselves out as to what we should think about it. On the one hand, one guy committed murder, and the other guy didn't. Okay, he committed attempted murder. But murder is murder, and attempted murder is attempted murder. It's not the same. In one case, a guy died, and the other case didn't die. Obviously, murder is much more serious than attempted murder. That's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is, what's the difference between the two cases? The difference between the two cases was a gust of wind. Why should that change the morality of what A did? Because a gust of wind blew or didn't blow? Why should that make it less serious? He wasn't in control of that gust of wind. He didn't take the gust of wind into account. In both cases, he tried his best to kill B. In one case, it didn't work because of the gust of wind. It was just his moral luck that the gust of wind blew aside, and he didn't kill him. So, from that point of view, he should be held as just as serious a criminal and be punished in just the same way. And I think most people have both intuitions. When you think about it, it seems right both ways, and of course it's a contradiction. So that's close to what we call a paradox. A paradox is where you have a contradiction and it's not clear what's wrong. It's not clear how to fix it, where the mistake is. Now, that's a problem in morality. But from our point of view, it isn't a problem. Because from our point of view, we have divine providence. So it isn't just an accidental gust of wind that blew the bullet aside. No. It's that the Creator didn't want the bullet to strike B. The Creator deflected the bullet. So then it comes out like this. As far as the way we treat A is concerned, in the first case where A kills B, we're going to treat him as a murderer and maybe execute him. In the second case where the bullet misses B, we're not going to treat A as a murderer. But that's because God doesn't want him treated as a murderer. That's why the gust of wind blew, to stop those consequences. So then, whatever your moral feelings are about murder and attempted murder and one's more guilty or less guilty, but here the moral decision is made by divine providence. He didn't kill him, and we only punish murder. We don't punish attempted murder. Not in the same way. We don't punish by death. So, divine providence determines whether he should get one punishment or another punishment. Now, the same thing could be true with respect to the positive side. A person wants to do a mitzvah, and he's prevented from doing the mitzvah. So, that means God didn't want him to have the benefit of doing the mitzvah. We said in the name of the Maharsha that if you actually do the mitzvah, then it has the effect on you of mitzvah guraris mitzvah. The mitzvah pulls along after it the motivation to do another mitzvah. The mitzvah magna, that a mitzvah protects you while you're doing it. If God arranges it that he can't do the mitzvah, it means God doesn't want him to have those benefits. So, It isn't as if I have to decide in the context of this one action what's right and what's wrong, is it appropriate, isn't it appropriate? No, the divine providence takes into account everything, all of the past. And there can be reasons why God doesn't want this person to have that benefit. But whichever way you say it, it is quite true that in the case of wanting to do the mitzvah and not succeeding, you don't get the full benefit of doing the mitzvah. Which again means that we are supposed to be oriented towards performing the action. Here's another what we call in Gemara Lashon nafka mina. Let's suppose I make the decision to do the mitzvah and then suddenly something prevents me beyond my control. How should I feel about it? It's like I have tefillin, and I put on tefillin in the morning. I'm in an isolated position, Chabad shliach or something, and there's the only tefillin. And I discover one morning that the tefillin are no good. So I have no tefillin, and there aren't any tefillin, and I can't get any tefillin. How should I feel? Should I feel, oh well, then God didn't want me to do it. He made it impossible. And since He made it impossible, I don't have to do it. And therefore it's fine. Or no, I have to do it. I'm obligated to do it. Now, circumstances arose that I can't do it, so I should feel terrible about losing out in doing the mitzvah that I'm obligated to do. One difference will be prayer. Please, Ribbon Shalom, help me. I don't want to be left without doing this mitzvah. So somebody will be passing through town at 3 p.m, and I recognize him by his appearance. He's a from Yid, and I say, Rabbi Yid, have you got 5 minutes to lend me your tefillin? I couldn't put on tefillin this morning. My tefillin became puzzle. And then you say, okay, so God help me fulfill the obligation I had all day. I had the obligation all day. I wasn't able to do it, so what? The obligation is there. So praying for the opportunity to fulfill the mitzvah when you're nanas, when it's impossible for you to do the mitzvah, is something which is very worthwhile if you're obligated to do the mitzvah. But if you're obligated just to try your best, you tried your best. Nothing else to do. So again, that's the orientation. Let's take prohibition. Torah says, don't do something. Don't eat cheeseburgers. So how do you fulfill that mitzvah? But not eating cheeseburgers. Nothing to it. Just don't eat them. Well, it's not so simple. There's a story about the Berditchev Rav, that he once went to the house of a Jew who was assimilated, quite wealthy. He knocked on his door, and when that Jew certainly didn't expect to see the Berditchev Rav to come to his door, but he invites him in, sits him down, and the host sits down, waiting to hear what the rabbi has to say. And they sit there in silence for 15 minutes, and then the Berditchev Rav gets up and walks out the door. So the host thinks, what's going on here? Came in, sat there for 15 minutes, didn't say a word, and then goes home? Like, what is that? Well, it eats away at him, it bothers him. So after several days, he can't take it anymore. He goes to the Berditchev Rav's house, knocks on the door. He says, Rav, I can't understand you. You came to my house. You sat there for 15 minutes. You didn't say a word. And then you walked out. What's going on? So the Berditchev Rav said to him, we have a statement in the Talmud. Kishem shemutzvah lo davisha anishma, kach mitzvah shelo lomar davisha lo nishma. Just as it is a mitzvah to say something which the other person will hear, so it is a mitzvah to not say something which the other person won't hear. Now, I have something which I know you won't hear. So the Talmud is telling me not to say it. But what kind of a mitzvah is that if I sit in my house and you sit in your house and I don't tell you? No, I have to go to your house and sit in your house right across the floor from you, sit there and then not say it. Then I did the mitzvah of not saying it. So you know what the reaction of the Jew is? Yeah, but Rabbi, what is it? So the Yeshiva says, look at that. See, you want to trap me now, right? You want to deprive me of the mitzvah. The mitzvah was not to say something which won't be heard. So that's why I didn't say it. So the Jew says, but Rabbi, how do you know it won't be heard? Maybe it will be heard. So he allows himself to be persuaded. Matter of fact, there's a widow who hasn't paid her rent, and they're going to throw her out in the street. And he wants this Jew who works in the bank to get her some dispensation. The Jew says, okay, Rabbi, I'll do it for you. Well, what does this illustrate? This illustrates how do you fulfill a negative commandment? Yosha v'lo asa'ah ki'ilu asa mitzvah, the Gemara says. If the opportunity arises and you stop yourself from violating the prohibition, then it's as if you performed a positive mitzvah. Now, I don't want to be misunderstood. It is not appropriate to go looking for cases where you'll be compromised, looking for cases where you have an opportunity to do something wrong, and then stop yourself and thereby get full credit. No, we don't do that. Kodesh Baruch Hu has his own methods of putting us under tests, and we can leave it to him. But Rav only did it in this case to make a demonstration to win over the heart of that Jew, which he succeeded in doing. But as a general policy, we don't do that. But what's the difference? The difference is merely not doing the thing the Torah says not to do isn't enough. That doesn't give you credit for fulfilling the prohibition. To fulfill the prohibition, you have to be in circumstances where it's available and it's reasonable and you have a desire to do it and stopping yourself from doing it. This is like what the Rambam says about Tshuva Gemura. I'm not going into that detail, but if you know what it is, it's the same thing. So there, what is the performance? The performance is saying no to your own desires to do it. Of holding back the action which your desires would lead you to do. That's how you conquer this particular challenge. And here, it's the lack of action which you force yourself to preserve, which is your performance of the mitzvah. So, you meet red-blooded American guys. If you insult them in public, 9 times out of 10, the response is very simple. It's a punch in the nose. You can't insult me in public. You can't do that. I won't tolerate that. It's not a reasonable response. It's not a moral response. It's certainly not a Torah response. But it's an American response. And this guy grew up in Texas or in Vermont or, some wild, uncivilized place. And he gets insulted. And his American red blood says, level him to the deck. He says, no, I can't do that. I can't do that. It's wrong. Shouldn't be done. So this holding himself back is active, not passive. He's not relaxed. He's very tense to stop himself from doing something which he knows is wrong. So it doesn't have to be an overt action. Your muscles are moving and your body is moving. It has to be active. The will has to be operating to determine a certain outcome. That's what gives it the active character and which gets the full benefit of success rather than just doing your best. I think I'll finish with one final idea, which this is an idea. Many of these ideas reverberate in many different places. This is in Sfas Emes, it's in Ramchal. We live in a world that has certain types of connections. ecology has revealed to us, let's say over the past 200 years, the food chain, ecological systems, that the planet is connected in ways that we never dreamt of before. You have plankton in the ocean. Let's say it gets a disease, and somebody says, well, so let it all die. We don't need it. Just gets in the propellers of ships and clogs them up and everything else. We'll have free seas, smooth seas. Yeah, and we'll all die of starvation because there's a food chain, and this sits at the bottom of the sea food chain. And with that, all the life in the food in the sea is going to die, and then human beings can't survive. Now, things are connected in ways that we never dreamt. We live in a world which has a kind of spiritual structure behind it. And when you perform an action, not only do you interact with the physical world, you interact with the spiritual world as well. When a person performs a mitzvah, certain sources of divine energy open up, the flow is more powerful, the flow distributes more widely, and the world changes. The same thing is true with an Aveira. A person performs an Aveira, he stops up certain of these flows and directs them in a different direction. So, how do you do that? How do you do that? If a human being is just a slightly smarter squirrel, as a certain famous theory would have you believe, how do you get connected to these spiritual forces that are behind the world, and are you able to make an effect on them? According to that theory, whose name begins with an E and then follows with a V, and you can probably spell the rest of it, 4-syllable word. You're no different from a horse or an orangutan or an ant or any other living creature. But that's not the truth. So, the Ramchal says that when the Kodesh Baruch Hu gives you a mitzvah, you're like we said before, a shliach of the king, an agent for the king. Now, when the agent sends the king, well, let's try that again. The king sends an agent on a mission, he could give him a certain document which says that he represents the king for this mission. So when he gets to where he's going, has to do what he does, he shows the document, and people say, okay, he represents the king. Not here on his own. Same thing is true when you do a mitzvah. You have Hermonda de Malka. You have a document from the king which says that you have the authority to change the spiritual structure of the world. So that when you do a mitzvah, the spiritual structure is changed by your action. But that's the action. The action, not the intent. Not the intent and not the try, the good try, it's the action. And if a person tries and fails, although he won't be criticized for the failure, but there's a reason why Kodesh Baruch Hu didn't give him that success. Let's imagine there's a Taz which says this, I think, in very striking terms. A person sitting and learning. He's sitting next to a lake, and he's sitting and learning. There's somebody swimming in the lake, and all of a sudden, he's in trouble. He's starting to yell. And the person sitting there happens to be a lifeguard. So he jumps into the lake, and he swims out, and he saves the guy's life. That's what he's supposed to do. First of all, because the saving of life is a very important mitzvah. And even more, when you study Torah, you have to study Torah with the permission, with the commitment to perform the mitzvahs in the Torah. Otherwise, the study of Torah is an abomination. So when the mitzvah arises, and because there's nobody else there, you have to do it, so you do it. Now, how do you feel about it? This goes back to what I said at the very beginning. How do you feel about it? Kodesh Baruch Hu lets me know what he wants. He wants me to learn. I was learning. Then he wants me to save the person's life. So he set it up. I'm the only person who can save his life. So I saved his life. I feel fine. I feel very happy about it. The Taz says, no, you shouldn't feel that way. Because Talmud Torah Kedeged Kulam, the study of Torah in a certain sense counts equally to all the other mitzvos. And the Kodesh Baruch Hu didn't give you the privilege of continuing to learn. He could have arranged the person shouldn't be drowning there. He could have arranged somebody else who could have saved him. If you arranged it this way, there's a double signal. One signal is, I want you to save his life. And the other signal is, your learning wasn't worth protecting. Your learning wasn't worth protecting. And on that, you have to feel there's a loss. You did the right thing. You're stopping the learning. There's no negative connotations in terms of your action whatsoever. But Kosh Baruch Hu didn't protect it. Since he didn't protect it, there's something there that needs to be thought about, perhaps corrected. So these are all illustrations of the idea that the Jewish principle is that you are responsible to act, to succeed, even though if you fail, but it's beyond your ability, there's no penalty. Okay?